Hi everybody, Christopher Bill here, the internet's busiest trombonist. I just had a great interview with Tim Albright. He is the trombone professor at Lawrence University, and before that he was my trombone professor at SUNY Purchase. But he will be one of the featured trombonists this summer at the International Trombone Festival in Muncie, Indiana, at Ball State University, July 10th through the 13th. Make sure you have your calendars marked for that, and you're looking into accommodations, hotels, flights, whatever you need to do to get there. Those are filling up fast. And you don't want to miss it. So look into all of that. But yeah, we had a really great interview. I learned all sorts of stuff I did not know about him, even though he was my teacher. He talked about stories of playing on Broadway, playing Carnegie Hall with Jay-Z, playing on a Grammy-winning album, all sorts of really cool stuff I think you're really going to enjoy. If you want to hear this in podcast form, you could do that as well at See Bleezy Knows. Just search your favorite podcast listening app for that, and you'll find it. Or just continue watching this video and you'll see it here. I think you really are going to enjoy this. And here it is, my interview with Tim Albright.
I'm here with my former teacher and inspiration, Tim Albright.
Yeah, Chris, you're an inspiration to me too, my man.
Tell me why you play trombone.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah, so you were going to say that you were going to ask questions that you didn't know about me in the past. So I started my musical career as a pianist at the age of 5. I wouldn't call that a career, but I started piano lessons when I was 5. My brother played the trumpet. He's 7 years older than me, and he taught me how to play cornet. We got a cornet for about like $20 from a garage sale, and he taught me how to play that when I was 8, and I was okay. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna do trumpet, and if that doesn't work, I really like the drums. I like banging on things. And our band director was a family friend, also a trombone player, and it's like, no, we need trombones in the band. You're gonna do that instead.
What were you listening to at the time? Like, what's a album or a song or a record that you like wore out at that time?
Yeah, so this band director, a family friend of ours, he gave me all these like mixtapes of trombone players. So I still remember. It's funny, I can't remember the album title because it was on a mixtape, but it was a Jack Teagarden record that had Stars Fell on Alabama, and it had Lover. These old great tunes, and he was just crushing it on the trombone, and I had never heard somebody do that before. And so that was the one that I had on my cassette player next to my bed and would like fall asleep to listening to at night. That was the biggest one. And then I found J.J. Johnson, same thing, like wore those out as well.
That was what, like middle school, high school, you were listening to those?
Yeah, even like elementary school, actually.
Really?
Yeah, he started me on that stuff early. That was like kind of the first music I listened to.
Wow, that's awesome. When did you know you were gonna pursue trombone professionally?
Man, I guess early high school I kind of knew, even though I loved math and science, and my parents were not musicians and were a little bit worried about how I was going to make a living as a musician. I guess I kind of had that in the back of my mind, like maybe I should be sensible and do, biology or chemistry or something. But it didn't take me long to realize, like, no, I'm kind of fooling myself here. Like I can't live without music. I remember I had teachers that said that. They said, okay, you can go into music if you know you can't live without doing anything else. People talk to us about that all the time, and I suppose I say that I pass that on to students now. Like, it can be a tough life, as you know, and so you have to really, really want it. And I knew that I really did. I don't know if many people know this. I tell some of my students that the day before, May 1, that you have to make your decisions for college, like that day I stayed home from high school because I couldn't decide between Indiana University and Eastman. Indiana would have had that kind of maybe like broader base, on campus, but obviously it has the conservatory as well. But ultimately, I chose Eastman, which also has University of Rochester. I actually never took a class at the University of Rochester, at the river
camp. You could have.
I could have, yeah, but I did not.
What drew you to Indiana University?
You know what? It was actually my sister who went to UCLA, big research school in California, and she loved like the college experience, and you like that the big your sports teams and all of this stuff, and in fact, the teacher, my teacher at the time, Doug Bates, who had gone to Indiana and kind of like, hey, you might check this out. And he also gave me one of my first CDs. CDs were pretty new when I was in high school, and I got Joe Alessi's Slide Area CD. And we actually had it feels ostentatious to say that we had a CD player in our car, because that was like a really big deal. But we happened to have a CD player that had a car that had a CD player, and I put that CD on the ride home. It took about 45 minutes to drive home from Santa Rosa. And, just the way I was floored when I heard Jack Teagard, and I was like, holy cow, like this is like another level, or like you could play the trombone like that. And that was a big influence too.
Do you remember a specific track that blew your mind on that?
Man, tons. I mean, I still remember like Grandal Concerto is huge. He played the Swan, this like beautiful version of Camille Saint-Saëns' Swan. Basazzi oboe sonata, I think originally written for oboe and continuo. And it's funny, so I was this kid. I mean, I had this great band director teacher, but I did a lot of self-teaching to myself too. And so I transcribed all the J.J. Johnson and the Jack Teagarden records, and I got this Joe Alessi record. It's like, I might as well transcribe this too. So I transcribed the Basazzi Concerto, I kind of learned that. And the Grandal and some of these things. It's just kind of learning from Joe, which is pretty good.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah.
Okay, and then how'd you hear about Eastman?
Oh, okay. So I went to a summer music festival called Summer Music Monterey in Monterey, California. It had been around for a long time, and at that time there were a couple of years in there when I went there that it was kind of loosely affiliated with Eastman. There were a lot of Eastman faculty there. So Rob Hudson was my trombone teacher, and he was a graduate student at Eastman. And that's where I met my mentor, Fred Sturm, who some of the people in the audience might know that name. He was an amazing jazz pedagogue. So he taught at Eastman. He was the head of the jazz program there. Amazing teacher. Also actually played trombone, played valve trombone in this band called Matrix, which is a fusion band. It was fairly famous back in the day. Anyways, he's from Wisconsin, and he taught at Lawrence, where I teach now, for years and years. And he's passed away, but up until just a few years ago, he was here. So yeah, Summer Music Monterey was why Eastman. I got to know some of the faculty there, and Fred kind of recruited me when he met me out there.
Tell me some things that come to mind when you think about those years.
Oh man, I loved my time at Eastman. It was an amazing time of growth, and as somebody that hadn't been exposed to a lot of great players before, I was like a kid in a candy store. I had all these amazing trombone players, and getting to study with Doc, with John Marcellus, was amazing. He was super cool. He loved jazz. He was an amazing classical player. He could play a ballad like nobody's business. At the time, he played this Benj, this 547 bore. He had such a gorgeous sound on that. Of course, anything that he played on would be amazing. But I just kind of associate him with that time, with that instrument. And let's see, and I had, the classmates like my buddy Mike Boshin and Phil Ostrander on trombone, and Rob Hudson, and all these folks. We would get together, and in the basement of the Eastman Theater, we would meet each other and just to have like impromptu jam sessions where there would be 3, 4, 5 of us in a like a 5x10 practice room, and they were really good trombone / piano players. Like Phil and Rob both played pretty good piano, so they would comp for us, and we would play bass lines for each other. And that's where I met my dear friend Scott Parkinson, who he was like super inspirational player too, a classical trombone player mostly. Studied with Milt Stevens, the National Symphony, before he came to Eastman, and he and I were in the same class, and he was really inspirational. He passed away at way too young of an age of a heart condition. But yeah, just being surrounded by all these just amazing players in Rochester, where there wasn't much to do besides practice.
You wrote a piece. Was it called Reflections?
Oh right, yeah.
That's about Scott.
Right. I wrote that for not too long after I was at Eastman, probably like 2000 or something like that. The trombone quartet called Novus asked a bunch of their friends and people they knew associated with Eastman to write pieces for their debut recording. So I wrote that for them, and Michael Clayville was a classmate of mine while he was there, while we were there together, and he asked me to write this piece. And I'm kind of a reluctant composer. Everybody asks me like, yeah, so you do all this you play all this music, and do you ever write stuff of your own? It's like, not really, actually. I just love playing music that's put in front of me as best as I can. And but yeah, so they asked me to do that. I thought, okay, I'm going to write this trombone quartet. It's 4 voices. How bad could it be? And I was glad that I did. And Scott had passed away not too long ago after they asked me to write it, and so I thought, I'll write something for him, and it just kind of came out.
When did you start taking yourself seriously as a professional musician and not just as a student? Because I'd imagine that was while you were in school.
Yeah, when I was a junior at Eastman, Ralph Alessi, great trumpet player, jazz trumpet player, and brother of Joe, came on faculty for just a couple of years while I was there. And he's an amazing improviser, trumpet player, composer, musician. He was playing with Steve Coleman at the time. Steve's an alto saxophone player that's kind of just a genius in what he does. Steve was doing a big project. It was a kind of like a big band, although it had strings and this sort of thing. And he asked Ralph to bring some students from Eastman to come be on this record. And so Shane Ensley on trumpet and Nabate Isles on trumpet and myself went out there to New York to record. And funny story, I guess Shane and Nabate had heard from Ralph that Steve Coleman was going to call them to do this record. And we all worshiped Steve Coleman at the time because Ralph had given us a lot of his music and was teaching us about his music. And for listeners or viewers that don't know Steve's music, it's a little bit hard to describe, but jazz, funk world, like really complex rhythms, and we just ate it up. We loved it. Those guys knew that Steve was going to call to ask them to do this record. I didn't, and so I get this call on my home phone, and now nobody picks up telephones, right? You see a number that you don't recognize, and you're like, I'm not going to pick this up. But phone rang, and I pick it up, and I say hello, and it says, "Hey, is this Tim?" "Yeah, this is Tim." "Hey, this is Steve Coleman." And I said, "Hey, yeah, what's up?" Thinking that it was one of my buddies,
Of course,
doing a prank call, and he's like, "Yeah, this is Steve Coleman. I'm called to ask you if you could play on this record." And it took me a while to realize it really was him. And so I had to put my my straight face on. I'm like, oh yes, Mr. Coleman, that sounds fantastic. Meanwhile, I was kind of peeing my pants because it was like such a big deal to me. So anyway, so I did that record. That was amazing, and then began to tour with him a little bit as part of this large ensemble called Steve Coleman and the Council of Balance.
For me, it's about the instrumentation, but it's also about the people who are playing. You know, so I try to, I write for people and I write for instruments, but I'm writing for personalities. And for me, an instrument, it has a sound, but I mean, I'm really looking at the person who's playing the instrument and what they can do.
So I guess that was when I started thinking, okay, I'm playing with this guy, this internationally recognized, and I was like, cool, maybe, you know. And I was thinking about going to grad school at the time too. It was wild. I was thinking about doing like orchestral trombone grad school. I'm still trying to make the decision about whether or not to devote all, you know, my time into like taking auditions or doing like the jazz thing. At the time, the jazz thing kind of won.
I know that decision well of, okay, should I continue on and do grad school with something more traditional or not?
Right.
This is one of the few things I do know about that time of your life. San Francisco Conservatory.
So my friend, a lot of my friends, like Scott Parkinson, for example, the guy that I mentioned that was so influential, like on the classical side to me, he went to Juilliard, and my buddy Mike Boshin went to Juilliard, and some of my other friends were like going on to do like the classical trombone. Let's do this kind of orchestra trajectory, and I struck up a relationship with Mark Lawrence at San Francisco Conservatory before I went to Eastman, because it was close to me. It was about an hour and a half from where I lived in California, and I was a member of the San Francisco Youth Orchestra when I was a senior. It's great experience. And so I took some lessons with Mark, and he was amazing. And so this seemed like the San Francisco Conservatory seemed like a good place to go, like maybe come back home possibly after school. And so yeah, so I almost went there, but I decided like maybe I'm just like, again, like I'm kind of fooling myself or into thinking, or maybe putting off the decision of becoming like a real, like an adult. And so that's kind of what it felt like. It would have been coming back home, would have to California. It would have been, you know, obviously I would have learned a ton, and sometimes I think about that, like what if I had done that? What would things have looked like? But it would have meant saying no to more tours with Steve, for example, and who knows what else. You know, like I guess where my life has gone, that was the what else. And so, you know, just like deciding whether or not to go to Eastman or Indiana, I was like, you know what, or deciding to go into music or math. Like, yeah, I know in my heart this is really what I want. So I'm going to do it, as scary as that was. And as a teacher now, I think that gives me some believability when I tell my students, like, you know, this, you got to trust your heart, or, you know, I know what they're going through, because it feels like the end of the world, or it feels like such a momentous decision. But, you know, we make those decisions, but we have the things that are important to us. So if we listen to those, then you kind of can't go wrong.
Yeah, it certainly helped me when I was going through that decision. I had gotten into Cal Arts, and they'd give me scholarship money, and I'm going,
right.
I don't think I'm gonna go, and everybody else is saying like, well, you have to,
Right.
and you were like, well, I didn't, but don't use me as the example. Just use yourself as the example. Like, what do you want?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely helpful. So, what did you do after undergrad?
I did a couple of tours with Steve. I moved back home for a moment just to have a home base. I played a cruise ship for 6 weeks in order to move to New York, to be able to live there and to be able to pay rent and hopefully not have a day job right away. My buddy Mike Boshin was really influential. He and I kind of played similar styles of music. We both kind of crossed the line between the jazz and classical thing. So he gave me a lot of gigs, the things that he couldn't do for better things that he was offered. And that was perfect for me. And it was nice for him that he had somebody he could call. I was actually not there for very long. This Broadway contractor called me to go on the road for a Broadway tour, a show called Fosse. And it paid a lot of money. And the dollar signs kind of like, oh, this could be cool. I could, have a little bit more security and then move back to New York. But he told me it was a year contract. And I was like, oh man, do I do this or not? I ultimately decided to do it.
Yeah.
And I stayed on for longer than that. Stayed on for that show for close to 2 years. And it was good and bad. And it was amazing because I met or kind of re-met some musicians like Alan Ferber, my good friend. He and I grew up in California. We went to that Summer Music Monterey Festival together, and he came onto that tour. So it was the two of us on trombone, and some other really great musicians. John Shadoba was on that tour, lead trumpet player. So actually, Alan and I and a bass player named Yoshi Waki would go during the breaks between the matinee and the evening performances. We would go backstage and have these little jam sessions, which was awesome. So I kind of get to keep practicing and keep my creativity up. And we would find whatever town we were in, we would find the local like jazz hang and just go try to sit in. And so that part was cool. And then the monotony of playing the same show every day, that was that was the downside of that. It was like kind of the trombone aspect of that becomes a little bit like factory work where you're like, okay, I know this show. I'm like reading a book as I'm playing, a show for 8 nights a week, or it's kind of funny, 8 shows a week for weeks on end without break. You tend to get a little bit slap happy sometimes.
Sure.
And so this was have been, I think it was like a Sunday matinee, right? So we're almost to the finish line. We're almost going to have a Monday off, and we had an associate conductor. It wasn't the regular conductor. So it's like when the sub is visiting, in school, it can have a little bit naughty. But it happened so Alan dropped a mute. And for whatever reason, like that was the thing that set us all off. Like it was, but it wasn't just a drop. It was like a drop, and then it like just kept spinning and making this noise in a really quiet section, delicate section when nobody is playing in the brass section. But then like the next song, the next number is this like really big band brass heavy thing where like we're on. And but at that point, nobody in the brass section could play because we were laughing so loud. They were laughing so hard, and so I just remember that just not being able to play a note on my instrument and thinking all the while like, wow, nobody is. There was one trumpet player. The second trumpet player was like able to like just do it, but that was it, right? In the whole brass section, like that was the one sound. It sounded terrible, right? We're supposed to be like professionals here, and we cannot make any noise on our instrument. And in Fosse, at the end of the show, a few of us go up on stage, put on costume, and play Sing 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 with these solos and stuff. And I wasn't sure even at that point if I was going to be able to play my solo and like make it. So I remember like I took a cold shower in the time that I had to change just to like cool myself down, and I made it. I played my solo, and it was okay. But yeah,
That's a good story.
Thank you.
You legitimately took a cold shower in between.
I legitimately did. Like, I didn't know what else to do. I was like, man, I can't fold on this solo. Like, there's a whole like dance number centered around the trombone solo, and I just imagine just like not doing it. But ultimately, it was a really cool experience. It made coming back to New York 2 years later a little bit challenging, because I knew how to play Fosse really well. Right. And I had maybe fallen off of the wagon of like a really good practice regimen. So I had to figure out how to kind of do that again. Like, okay, how do I become a well-rounded trombonist again? So that took a minute. But when I moved back to New York, I moved back to Brooklyn, and I did have this security blanket of some of my savings from that tour. So I got to kind of like live the high life in Brooklyn and just do all the gigs, like say yes to everything, whether it paid $5 or if it paid $100 or $200, and just hang. Like, that's where Marshall Jokes and Alan Ferber and I and a couple other folks would get together, and normally in Alan's house, sometimes in Marshall's house apartment to play trombone quartets. So we would read things like we would read the Bota Quartet together, and
who was the fourth?
Yeah, actually, it was kind of it was rolling. Julie Kalu was often there as bass trombonist. Mike Fawn, an amazing trombone player. He's well known as a valve trombone player. He lived above Alan. He and his wife, Marianne McSweeney, a great bass player, were there. So often, if Mike Fawn heard us playing, he would come down the stairs and knock on the door and start playing with us.
You started getting Broadway gigs at that point, I'm sure.
Yeah, I had met Mike Davis and Jim Pugh through kind of the Eastman connection, and they offered me some subs. And that sort of thing is, as you know, starts building on itself. You kind of get one gig and it leads to another. Yeah, the Broadway experience.
Yeah. Yes. So when did phase 3 begin? The teaching aspect of your life.
Yeah. Well, you're familiar with that.
Only 4 years of it.
Right. Well, it was close to that for me too. It actually started when I joined the Atlantic Brass, this brass quintet that I've been a member of since 2007. I was living in New York, and actually I think John Rojak had recommended me. They were looking for a new trombone player, and so I actually went out and auditioned for them. I tell people I've basically done 2 auditions in my professional life, one for Atlantic and then one for Lawrence, and So I went out and played with them and had a blast, and so I joined them. And they are all 4 of those other guys are just amazing, inspirational teachers, and that's a big part of the group. We put on a seminar of brass chamber music every summer. Now it's happening at Lawrence, which is awesome. And so I just got to see them and learn from them in their teaching, and I became really passionate about that then. And in New York, people were asking me for lessons, and so I began to do that there too. So then the opportunity to come to SUNY Purchase opened itself, and I was asked to be there as part of actually a brass quintet too, with Graham Ashton on trumpet. So initially when I came to Purchase, it was just really to be part of this brass quintet and to do this seminar. Were you there when we did the seminar? You were, right?
With the quintet or with...
Yeah, where we would play for you and you would play for us. Yeah.
Yeah, it had slowed down by the time I got there, but you're still doing it.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was cool, but that was all I did. And then eventually I began to get some students. You were my first student, I believe.
I got the fact checkers on it. I believe Claude was the first.
Oh, Claude Free. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Claude. Sorry, Claude. Right, but you were one of my first students, and so that was awesome getting to work with you and Claude and Tom McHugh and Rich Liverano, like all these folks. Like, you guys were just so great and so inspiring to me. It was super fun to work with you. I still remember you did like the the Schumann fantasy Stück, right? And I was like, whoa, man, this guy can play. And that was the sort of stuff that you wanted to do. And man, that was just a dream. So, so I kind of fell in love with teaching through Atlantic and through being involved in Purchase.
You're welcome. I didn't know that. I had no idea that we were your first students until this moment.
My first full-time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was ready to quit trombone, and then you were like, well, maybe just practice. Yeah.
I practiced the stuff that you really loved, right? You brought me these things, and I'm like, oh man, you need to do that, right? You brought in the what was it, the Bach fugue in G minor, right? The Toccata fugue, right?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Back then, yeah.
Where you played all the parts. That was the first time I had seen you do that thing, which now you do, on YouTube all the time. And I was like, whoa, this is you need to be doing this.
Not all teachers felt that way. So it was helpful to hear somebody saying. I mean, even when I started doing the looping, which was later, you were like, okay, bring it in. Like, cool, let's hear it. Yeah. And I tell people about that moment a lot because I brought it in. I was super excited about it, and I played you a couple of things. And you're like, okay, well, why don't you work on the intonation here and the tone here and all this stuff? And we weren't working on looping. We're doing the same stuff that I would be doing playing a Bordoni, but it's now I want to do it, and so amazing. Yeah.
Now, not every student is like that too. Some students are, they need okay, you're going to play the Bordoni and the Coprash and all these things, and that's cool. But somebody like you that comes in and is so, driven, has an idea of what you want to play. It's like, man, that's kind of can't ask for more.
How long were you at Purchase?
6 years, I think.
Mm-hmm. And what were you doing alongside that? I mean, you were playing a bunch of shows. Do you remember some of those?
My favorites were On the Town. That was one of the last shows I did. Bernstein show that was a revival. That was my favorite Broadway experience.
Really?
It was 30-piece orchestra, and the orchestra was featured. We were in a pit, but it was a really open and raised pit. So the audience saw us and we saw them, and we could see the stage. And I had never had a Broadway, a musical experience like that, where I could see I was part of the show. Normally in Broadway, especially, you're in a pit or maybe sometimes in a separate room. And if you are in a pit, it's this much of the audience that you can see. That's the separation between the stage and the audience is here. And you're kind of caged animals in a way. But I always tell people, Broadway, the thing that I loved was getting to play with amazing musicians, who just played at a really high level. That was awesome. But not being able to be part of the show was kind of terrible. And so On the Town was not like that at all. The music was really, really featured in the show. And so that was cool. I also did West Side Story. Apparently, I'm a Bernstein aficionado now, or a Bernstein expert on Broadway. I did Spam-A-Lot. It was cool. I miss the hang. I'm not doing that now. That was amazing. And like I said, I miss playing, at a high level every night. I get to play on a high level here now where I'm teaching. But it's not. I don't do it on a daily or nightly basis. But I will take the family life and the commute over those other things.
I can imagine. So where'd you meet your wife?
We met in Brooklyn. Corey and I met through mutual friends through Eastman connection. She also was at Eastman, but a little bit later than I was there. So Fred Sturm's daughter, Maddie Sturm, introduced us. They were roommates. And,
wow.
The rest is history. We've got our two little boys, and I can't imagine my life without her. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and that's what, phase 3 or 4. At that point, it was okay, there are things that are more important. Yeah. Now you're at Lawrence University. How did that happen?
Corey and I had thought, wouldn't it be cool if I were offered a teaching position somewhere, or something came up where I could where we could see each other more. Because when I was at Purchase and gigging in New York, I was either on the road or I was doing Broadway or I was teaching at Purchase. I mean, there were most days I would leave the house at 6 and then get home at 1, like 6 a.m. and then 1 a.m. And on the days that I had free, I normally had a show that night too. And so yeah, we just were not seeing each other. And then out of the blue, I got this email from the head of the brass department here, John Daniel, saying, "Hey, do you have any students or anybody that you would recommend for this job at Lawrence?" And I thought, oh, Lawrence, because I knew Fred Sturm taught out here, and the school had a reputation for me because of that. I had also been out to visit Lawrence as a guest artist, and with Maria Schneider's band. I was subbing with her when we did a tour that went to Lawrence, and I knew it was a really cool school, and I knew it was close to Corey's family because she's from Wisconsin and her family's kind of Milwaukee, Madison area. So I thought, man, maybe I'll throw my hat into the ring. Probably won't happen, but doesn't hurt to try. And they didn't need a master's or a doctorate. I made it to the final round of visiting and meeting the students and working with them and playing a little recital. And through the process of doing those interviews and audition and putting my resume together and talking about my philosophy of teaching and all of these things that they ask, I came to know that I really wanted the gig. Before that, when it first started, I thought, we'll just try it out and see, it doesn't hurt to kind of try this. And that process of kind of soul searching and answering the questions that they were asking, I thought, I remember telling Corey at one point, as I was staying up late night writing an essay about my teaching philosophy, I thought, you know what, I really want this one now.
Yeah.
So then we moved, and it's been awesome.
What are some of the things that happen in lessons that you make you disappointed?
What makes me disappointed? Wow, that's an interesting question. When I can tell that a student hasn't tried, or hasn't put in the effort. Man, I remember that happening with Doc, right? I would try to like come in and kind of sight read an etude that he had assigned.
Mm-hmm.
And tell right away, right? I kind of thought that maybe I'd be able to get it past him, and maybe he didn't even say anything. But now, as a teacher, I will say something right away. I'm like, "You didn't practice that, right?" And they're like, "Yeah, I didn't get practice it." I'm like, well, okay.
Yeah.
Let's just work on that, right? And everybody they're pulled in so many different ways, and I totally get that. But that's probably the biggest thing that I could say. Like, disappointment maybe is not the perfect word for it, but
I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. Well, it's unrealized potential, right? Because you see the student and that like if you just put in the effort just a little bit more than you're doing, like you would see the results, and
that's right.
That's why you're frustrated. It's like,
that's right. Yeah, but I try to move from the frustration to encouragement. Like, okay, why is it that you didn't practice this? And sometimes it's laziness, and so you have to address that. But sometimes it's something else, like they don't think that they have it in themselves to do that, which I know that they do.
Right.
Like I assigned this for a reason. And let's figure out why you haven't practiced it. And so for some of them, it's just like, I'm scared. And so we talk about that. Yeah.
That's I don't know if you know this about yourself. Maybe you do, but that's why you're a great teacher. And that's something that a lot of people I've worked with do not have. Like they'll be good technicians of music or the trombone, which you are, but their problem solving ends there. And so if you didn't do the work, they're like, well, okay, we'll go do it, and then we could work on it.
Right.
They're not there to get that mental aspect honed in. What is an album or song or record that you're listening to now that you're super stoked about?
Oh, man, so we recently got a record player. There's something about having the music at our fingertips that makes it less precious. And so I don't think we listen as carefully sometimes because you can just, it's so, it's so ubiquitous. And, so I bought a record player and these powered speakers, and it sounds awesome. And so for Christmas, I asked for the new Wayne Shorter record, which is this. It's amazing. It's a 3-record set, and it has a graphic novel actually that Wayne wrote with his wife, and it's called Emanon, and it's awesome. So it's Wayne and his quartet with the Orpheus Chamber Ensemble, which is really cool because I'm hearing a lot of my friends play in the orchestra with Wayne. So that's the big one. And Kenny Garrett, I've actually been kind of introduced to Kenny Garrett for the first time from my students. He was like kind of a hole in my jazz knowledge. And so I coach a jazz small group, and they're like, we want to play Kenny Garrett. So I'm checking out all these great, like November 15 and Wayne's Thing, and Sing a Song, and all these great Kenny Garrett tunes through my students, and I love it. The music's super fun, like really, really happy music.
That's awesome. That reminds me of a question, which is there anything that you can think of through any of your students over the years that you started working on and you were like, and you had to like figure it out, and so you actually learned the thing because your student was working on it, and like you would have never done that, but you're like so grateful that you did?
Oh, right. Well, Rich Liverano learned the Barrio Sequenza. That's a challenging piece. I don't know it, but I told him, I don't know this piece. Let's work on it together. And so that was really fun there's a lot of multiphonics in that piece, and really challenging multiphonics where sometimes you sing above the note, sometimes you sing below, and sometimes you're doing kind of a gliss with your voice that goes from above down below, and really challenging stuff to do. And so that was awesome. There are a lot of times like that where I encourage my students, as you know, to like just bring in whatever that inspires them. So a lot of times I'll just be straight up like, I'm not the expert on this, but I'm here to help you learn how to learn it.
Do you have a current project you're excited about? You're busy and you have a family. I don't know if that's a good question for you.
No, that's okay. So I'm involved in this amazing summer festival. It's in its second year. It's called Mostly Modern Festival, and it's an orchestra festival, kind of loosely modeled off of the Aspen model, where the faculty play principals and there's a festival orchestra. But we're playing music by living composers or music like modern masterworks. So we're doing this year we're doing a Takamitsu piece and John Adams' Harmonière, and like all these amazing pieces. But there are also student composers that come in too and write brand new music. For Atlantic Brass, for example, we'll get written a lot of pieces. And we'll premiere those and get to workshop those with the composers. So I love that. I love getting to work with composers in real time, and they challenge us and we can challenge them. And so that's a good project. And then my brass quintet Atlantic does this seminar as well. That's also too late to apply for, but it's amazing. And I mentioned that before. We're doing it at Lawrence, and it's 2 weeks at the end of July. And again, I just get super inspired by the students that we work with, and we challenge ourselves with a lot of challenging music, and that's awesome too.
When do applications open up for both of those?
Usually those sorts of things. I don't remember the exact date, but I think they open up in the fall, and they normally close March 1 or March 15.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So that's for Mostly Modern and ABQ?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. I thought of another project.
Okay, let's hear it.
The Daphnis Prieto Big Band did an album last year called Back to the Sunset. Daphnis is an amazing drummer, Cuban-American drummer, that I met through Steve Coleman, actually. He was drumming with him at the time. And anyway, he made this record, this big band record that's super awesome, and it won a Grammy. It won the Grammy for the Best Latin Jazz Album of 2018. So we're going to play at the Newport Jazz Festival this summer, and a couple other tours coming up. But yeah, that's super fun.
Are you a Grammy-winning trombonist?
You have to be careful with the wording of it, don't you? I'm on a Grammy-winning album. I don't know, maybe.
I don't have to be careful with it. You have to be careful. I'm putting it everywhere. Taught by Grammy-winning trombonist. Do you have a favorite gig you've ever done that was like a one-off or something?
Playing with Jay-Z in Carnegie Hall was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's such a different world, right? I remember he and his entourage came to the rehearsal studio, and it was just like, wow, this was like a level of celebrity that I've never seen before and never will. And I just remember Carnegie. I've never seen Carnegie Hall like that either. It was his band and then an orchestra. Dave Taylor and I were playing trombone, and Dave sounded amazing on that concert. And just playing this just amazing music that's so different than what I normally do, and the crowd is way different than a crowd that I normally play for, right? That's very normally buttoned up. And a different crowd than normally is in Carnegie Hall, and it was just like a giant party. And I remember being really afraid actually, because Jay-Z went out for one of the last tunes. He went into the audience. He went up into one of the balconies and was singing and rapping in the balcony, and people were looking over. They were in the if he was on the second balcony, they were looking over it from the third balcony to try to see him. I thought, man, people are gonna fall, they're gonna fall off of this balcony and die.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was amazing. And I also remember thinking it really funny that the Carnegie Hall smelled like pot.
Mm-hmm.
During that concert. That was something that I didn't think I would ever experience either. But yeah, so that was a pretty fun one.
This summer you will be playing at the International Trombone Festival. Tell us anything you know about that.
Well, okay, so Chris Van Hoff put together a group of Eastman alumni, and I believe we're doing a J.J. Johnson tribute, featuring some soloists from Eastman and an all Eastman alumni backed ensemble. Yeah, come on out and check us out at Muncie, Indiana at ITF.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. This was really fun for us to put together. Trombonists usually don't get in-depth interviews like this, and so we hope to do more with other featured musicians for the upcoming Trombone Festival. Comment with what you thought and what you want to see. And really make sure you have your calendar marked July 10th through the 13th, and you're looking into flights and hotels right now. You don't want to miss it. And yeah, I hope to see many of you there this summer at the International Trombone Festival.